When the dust of the Civil War finally settled, America stood at a crossroads. The South lay in ruins, and millions of newly freed African Americans faced a stark question: what does freedom truly mean? And where can it be found? For many, the answer lay far beyond the boundaries of their old lives, in the vast open lands of the American West. There, beyond the reach of the plantation system, they sought something larger than liberty. They sought dignity, purpose, and a chance to define themselves on their own terms. The journey west was not just a migration. It was an act of courage. These men and women left behind everything familiar, guided only by the hope of a new beginning. They rode into lands of sweeping plains, red dust, an endless sky, a world still wild, raw, and untamed. And in that wilderness, they found a new calling, the life of the cowboy. To most people, the word cowboy conjures up an image shaped by old Hollywood films: rugged white men, revolvers on their hips, riding off into a golden sunset. But history tells a different story. In truth, nearly 1 in 4 cowboys was black. These were men who roped cattle, tamed horses, and braved dangerous trails from Texas to Kansas. They were skilled, fearless, and indispensable to the development of the American frontier. Yet, despite their contributions, their stories were pushed aside. The myths of the Wild West, written by dime novelists and filmmakers, rarely mentioned them. The laughter, the songs, the sweat of black cowboys vanished from public memory, replaced by fiction. But their legacy remains hidden in the dust of old trails, in forgotten photographs, and in the rhythms of Western life that still echo today. This story is not just about forgotten names. It is about reclaiming truth about the dreamers who built America's identity from the ground up. The black cowboys were more than workers. They were pioneers of freedom, resilience, and pride. They shaped the music, language, and spirit of the West. And through every hardship, they stood tall in the saddle, proving that courage knows no color. As we ride together through this forgotten chapter of history, we invite you to rediscover the real Wild West, one filled with untold stories of strength, unity, and hope. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, stories that challenge the myths and celebrate the voices left out of the spotlight, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who love learning the real stories behind the legends. Because the more we remember, the more complete our history becomes. And somewhere in that open prairie, beneath the same wide sky, the spirit of the black cowboy still rides proud, free, and unforgettable. Historians estimate that 1 in 4 cowboys in the American West was black, a truth that redefines everything we think we know about the frontier. Beneath the blazing sun and vast horizons, these men rode side by side with their peers, tending cattle, driving herds for hundreds of miles, and protecting ranches from the dangers of the wilderness. They were born from resilience, shaped by survival, and guided by an unspoken code of honor that demanded skill, endurance, and courage. Yet, despite their essential role in the making of the West, their names and faces faded from the grand narrative, buried beneath layers of myth, silence, and selective memory. The end of the Civil War opened a door to a world that promised freedom but offered little guidance. For the newly freed, the West seemed like a blank page, untamed, unpredictable, but full of potential. On sprawling ranches from Texas to Oklahoma, there was work to be done, and work meant independence. The skills many black men had honed in captivity, herding, breaking horses, handling tools, and managing livestock suddenly became invaluable. Out on the trails, ability mattered more than color. A cowboy's worth was measured by how well he could ride, rope, and endure, not by the color of his skin Life on the open range was harsh, but it was honest. Under starlights, the crackling fire became the great equalizer. Men shared stories, songs, and laughter, their faces lit by the flickering glow of flame and moonlight. In those moments, the divisions of race blurred into the shared exhaustion of a day's hard labor. The black cowboy carved a place for himself there not by asking, but by proving his presence was not an exception, but a cornerstone of what the West truly was, a place where grit defined a man more than his past. One could imagine figures like Nat Love, born into slavery in Tennessee, who later became one of the most famous cowboys in the West. Known as Deadwood Dick, he won roping and shooting contests, survived wild stampedes, and chronicled his life in an autobiography that offered one of the few first-hand accounts from a black cowboy. Then there was Bill Pickett, a man of unmatched showmanship and innovation, who created the art of bulldogging wrestling steers by biting their lips to control them, a daring technique that transformed rodeo culture forever. Bose Ikard, another trailblazer, rode alongside the legendary cattleman Charles Goodnight, navigating treacherous routes across the plains and deserts. His calm intelligence and loyalty immortalized in stories passed down through generations. But for every name remembered, there were hundreds more who vanished from record. Men who guided cattle drives along the Chisholm Trail, who faced bandits, storms, and stampedes with unwavering resolve, and who worked from dawn until stars reclaimed the sky. They lived on the margins of recognition, their achievements unrecorded, their images absent from photographs, their stories replaced by the whitewashed fiction of Western films. Hollywood would later claim the cowboy as its own, turning him into a symbol of rugged white masculinity. The cowboy on screen was stoic, gun-slinging, clean-cut hero who never seemed to sweat under the relentless sun. Yet the real cowboys were often far from this romantic image. They were weathered, wary, and deeply diverse. Black cowboys were there in every dusty town, their laughter mingling with the jangle of spurs, their voices shaping the songs that would become American folk tradition. The spirituals and work songs carried on the trails infused rhythm into the long, lonely rides, their cadences echoing the African musical heritage that survived even in freedom's harsh terrain. Racism did not disappear on the frontier. Many ranchers refused to promote black men to positions of authority, and some towns barred them from saloons and hotels. Yet, on the trail, survival demanded cooperation. When the cattle broke loose in a storm or the river rose too high, no one cared about the color of the hands pulling the ropes. A man's courage became his only currency. And so, through perseverance, the black cowboy carved a quiet revolution not through speeches or protests, but through daily excellence in the face of indifference. Their legacy seeped into the cultural soil of the West. The swagger, the hats tilted against the wind, the confident posture in the saddle all bore the imprint of the men who lived by rhythm and resolve. They brought a cadence to cowboy life, blending African, native, and European traditions into something distinctly American. Over time, this fusion would influence blues, jazz, and even the language of the frontier itself. Words like buckaroo, cowpoke, and wrangler carried echoes of multilingual exchange born on those dusty trails. It is only in recent decades that the truth has begun to resurface. Historians, archivists, and descendants have worked to unearth the forgotten photographs, the letters, and the records that prove just how central these men were to shaping the West. Museums have begun to honor them. Rodeos now feature black cowboy associations that keep their spirit alive through competition and storytelling. And as more of these stories emerge, they offer not just a correction of the record, but a redefinition of American identity itself. Because the story of the cowboy, that enduring symbol of freedom, independence, and perseverance, cannot be told truthfully without the voices of those who helped create it. The black cowboys of the American frontier stood at the crossroads of oppression and opportunity. Turning struggle into skill, and skill into legacy, they tamed the wild, not only of the land, but of history's silence. And though their songs may have been nearly forgotten, their spirit still rides through time, galloping across the open plains of memory, reminding us that the true West was always more diverse, more human, and far more heroic than legend ever allowed us to believe. The story of the black cowboy is inseparable from the legacy of labor and skill forged long before the West was ever settled. In the cotton fields and tobacco plantations of the South, the end of slavery did not erase these men's knowledge or capabilities. Rather, it transformed the very tools of survival into instruments of freedom. For generations, enslaved African Americans had tended animals, cultivated crops, and managed work that required precision, patience, and an intuitive understanding of the land. These experiences, though born from oppression, laid the foundation for expertise that would become invaluable on the open ranges of Texas, Kansas, and beyond, where cattle drives stretched for hundreds of miles under relentless sun and unforgiving skies. The transition from plantation to prairie was not immediate, but the skills carried across the South to West migration became a passport to independence. The young men who once roamed the fields with livestock under the watchful eyes of overseers now rode across vast, untamed terrain with authority and confidence. They learned to read the behavior of cattle, anticipate their movements, and move with them as if speaking an unspoken language, the rhythm of hooves and the sway of tails guiding their every motion. Herding was no simple task. Stampedes could erupt in seconds, and a misjudged maneuver could cost lives or livelihoods. Yet, the black cowboys navigated these dangers with the expertise passed down from years of tending animals, recognizing the nuances in behavior that others often overlooked. Breaking horses was another domain where their mastery became legendary. Many of these men had grown up around the natural instincts of animals, understanding how to assert dominance without cruelty and how to establish trust in the delicate partnership between rider and mount. A horse, untamed and spirited, could mean freedom or disaster. The cowboy who could calm its fury and guide it across the plains wielded a rare kind of power, one born of patience, intuition, and relentless practice. This mastery was not simply a matter of survival, it became an art, a performance, and in many cases, a reputation that traveled ahead of the cowboy on every trail and at every rodeo. The work itself was grueling. Days began before sunrise, with the air still thick from the chill of dawn and the smell of dew-soaked grass. Men saddled horses, inspected gear, and prepared the herds for travel, all the while anticipating the unpredictable challenges of rivers, weather, and wildlife. Their movements were fluid, almost instinctive, a testament to the countless hours spent in sweat and toil before ever mounting the open range. In every rope thrown, every steer guided, and every fence mended, there was a lineage of knowledge rooted in plantation labor, transformed into freedom-earned expertise. Yet, technical skill alone did not define their contribution. It was also the resilience and ingenuity they brought to the frontier. When cattle were scarce, water ran low, or storms threatened to scatter the herd, it was often the black cowboy whose quick thinking and experience kept the operation intact. He knew how to read the land, anticipate shifts in weather, and improvise solutions under pressure. The subtle lessons of survival learned under the harshest conditions in the South became essential for navigating the even harsher realities of frontier life, turning adversity into a form of quiet mastery. Cultural knowledge traveled with them as well. Though less tangible, it was no less influential. African rhythms and songs found their way into campfire melodies during long drives, offering comfort, coordination, and a sense of community among men who relied on one another for both safety and morale. Storytelling became a way to preserve history, impart lessons, and inspire courage. And it was through these traditions that many young cowboys learned not only how to handle cattle and horses, but also how to navigate the human complexities of trust, leadership, and endurance. In these moments, skill and culture merged, forming a foundation that would influence the very identity of the West. The contributions of black cowboys in roping, herding, and breaking horses were not incidental. They were fundamental to the economy and survival of ranches, cattle drives, and even emerging towns. Ranch owners, whether they recognized it or not, depended on these men's expertise. Yet recognition in popular culture lagged far behind reality. While white cowboys became symbols in novels, posters, and eventually films, black cowboys remained largely invisible, their labor and artistry subsumed by the romanticized myths of the West. And yet, despite historical neglect, their impact endures. Every technique perfected on the trail, every strategy employed to tame an untamed range, and every lesson passed down through generations of cowboys carries the imprint of African American ingenuity. The legacy of their plantation-trained skills lives on not merely in the mechanics of ranch work, but in the ethos of the cowboy itself, a blend of courage, resourcefulness, and respect for the land and animals that sustain life. In tracing the journey from the fields of the South to the endless horizons of the West, one sees that the black cowboy was not simply a laborer. He was a pioneer in every sense, a man who carried the burdens of history while carving out a new identity through mastery, intelligence, and endurance. The horses he broke, the cattle he guided, and the trails he blazed were more than a means of livelihood. They were a declaration of freedom, skill, and enduring influence. In understanding the black cowboy, we do more than acknowledge a forgotten demographic. We uncover the very threads that helped weave the fabric of the American West. Threads that shimmer with skill, perseverance, and a quiet but undeniable brilliance. Even as black cowboys demonstrated unmatched skill on the open range, their presence in the West was shadowed by the harsh realities of a society still steeped in racial prejudice. The very expertise that made them indispensable, their ability to herd cattle across treacherous trails, to tame wild horses, and to navigate the unforgiving expanse of plains and deserts, could not shield them from the systemic inequalities that followed them from the plantations of the South. No matter how proficient, courageous, or respected they became among their peers, the color of their skin determined how the world would recognize, or often fail to recognize, their contributions. The cattle drives demanded endurance and ingenuity. Yet when the trail ended, the same men who had driven hundreds of cattle miles under blistering sun and relentless storms often found themselves barred from saloons, lodging, and social spaces reserved for white cowboys. Pay was another battle fought quietly, under the radar of public attention. Ranchers depended on their expertise, yet often compensated them less than their white counterparts. While a white cowboy might receive the full bounty for a season's work, a black cowboy could be offered a fraction, justified by the same prejudices that had long underpinned slavery. It was a cruel irony that the very skills honed under oppression became both their ticket to opportunity and the source of continued discrimination. Each day on the range was a test not only of physical endurance, but of resilience against a world eager to minimize their worth. In the flickering glow of the campfire at night, amidst the murmurs of the herd and the rustle of saddle leather, these men shared their frustrations as well as their triumphs, forging bonds with one another that transcended the barriers imposed by society. The exclusion from rodeos and public competitions was a particular wound to pride. Rodeos were not just entertainment. They were stages where cowboys could demonstrate their artistry, their courage, and their mastery of animals, gaining fame and respect. For black cowboys, these opportunities were frequently denied, and when allowed, often segregated or limited, with judges and audiences reluctant to acknowledge their victories. Yet in the shadows of the spotlight, they innovated and adapted, creating informal contests, teaching one another, and passing skills down through oral tradition. The ingenuity that had once served to survive the grueling cattle drives now became a quiet rebellion against invisibility, ensuring that excellence could not be fully suppressed even when public recognition was withheld. Social segregation followed them into towns as well. Boarding houses, restaurants, and theaters often operated under strict racial lines, meaning that a black cowboy might have to sleep outside or cook his own meals while white counterparts enjoyed comfort and leisure. Despite these constraints, black cowboys forged communities wherever they went, creating informal networks of mutual support and protection. They shared tips on trails, warned each other of dangers, and celebrated successes quietly yet proudly, demonstrating that even in a divided society, solidarity and dignity could flourish. These networks were the backbone of a culture that persisted despite the erasure and marginalization that history would later impose. Even within the cowboy subculture itself, discrimination lingered subtly. Stories of heroism, innovation, and courage were often recorded without attribution, or assigned to white counterparts in the retelling. The maneuvers perfected on cattle drives, the techniques for handling unbroken horses, and the inventive solutions to crises along the trails all bore the fingerprints of black cowboys. Yet the history books rarely acknowledged them. The paradox was stark. They were indispensable to the West's economy, culture, and folklore, yet rendered invisible by a society unwilling to grant equality in either narrative or recompense. Despite these barriers, black cowboys persevered with a resilience that transformed hardship into legacy. Their presence on the trail was both a challenge to prejudice and a testament to human determination. Each day spent mastering the herd, calming a fractious horse, or repairing a broken fence was an assertion of agency in a world that sought to limit it. And although rodeos, saloons, and hotels often shut doors, the cowboys found alternative spaces to gather, train, and celebrate their culture, embedding traditions and skills into the fabric of Western life. Music, storytelling, and camaraderie became tools of survival and identity, intertwining African heritage with frontier experience in a way that subtly reshaped the culture around them. The discrimination they faced did not erase their impact. Rather, it underscores the depth of their contribution. Without their labor, their expertise, and their unwavering commitment, the cattle drives that fueled the West's economy and the cultural identity of the frontier would have faltered. Their lives illustrate a paradox of the American West, a land of freedom and opportunity that simultaneously constrained those who were essential to its growth. They endured long rides, perilous work, and social exclusion with a stoicism that inspired those who witnessed it, proving that courage and skill do not yield to prejudice. In the stories that survived, the echoes of these struggles remain. Accounts of cowboys like Nat Love and Bose Ikard, of the countless unnamed men whose sweat and wisdom shaped every mile of trail and every ranch, reveal a layer of history that challenges the familiar myths of the Wild West. These men navigated a world that recognized their labor but denied their equality, transforming adversity into expertise and isolation into community. Their resilience was as essential as their rope skills or horse mastery, a quiet but enduring assertion of presence and value. And it is in this combination of skill, courage, and unyielding determination that the true essence of the black cowboy is found, not only as a laborer on the frontier, but as a symbol of perseverance in the face of systemic inequality, a living testament to the complexity, richness, and enduring power of the American West. The influence of black cowboys on the culture of the American West extends far beyond the practical skills of herding cattle and breaking horses. It reaches deep into the rhythms, styles, and language that defined life on the frontier. The West, often romanticized as a land of solitary white heroes, was in reality a tapestry woven with countless contributions from African Americans whose creativity and resilience shaped the very fabric of cowboy life. Music, clothing, and slang were not mere adornments or trivialities. They were expressions of identity, community, and survival, carrying echoes of African traditions across the open plains and into the hearts of Western towns. Around the flickering glow of campfires, after long days of exhausting trail rides, the Black Cowboy-esque songs filled the night air with both solace and rhythm. Work songs, spirituals, and improvised melodies accompanied the slow, steady movements of the herd, creating a cadence that kept both men and animals in sync. The call and response patterns of African music, carried from plantations in the South, found new life on the trails, transforming labor into ritual and fostering camaraderie among cowboys of all backgrounds. These melodies, infused with longing, hope, and resilience, were more than entertainment. They were a lifeline, a way to preserve dignity and morale in a world that often sought to deny it. The harmonies of the Black Cowboy echoed across valleys and river beds, lingering in the air long after the campfire had burned low, and in doing so, they left a permanent mark on the cultural landscape of the West. Clothing, too, became a canvas for identity and influence. The iconic cowboy hat, bandana, and boots were adapted with a flair and practicality that reflected African American heritage and ingenuity. Brightly colored scarves were tied with intricate knots. Leather chaps were adorned with unique stitching patterns, and hats were shaped to signal personal style and status within the group. These choices were not merely aesthetic, they were functional, designed to protect against the sun, dust, and brush of the prairie, while also signaling individuality in a profession that demanded uniformity in work. In towns and rodeos, the presence of a black cowboy dressed in such a distinctive manner challenged the assumptions of the era, blending practicality with an understated defiance of imposed social limits, demonstrating that skill and style could coexist, and that culture could be both visible and transformative. Language, perhaps the most subtle yet pervasive contribution, reveals the deep integration of African American culture into Western life. Phrases, slang, and jargon used on the trail were often borrowed, adapted, or innovated by black cowboys, embedding African linguistic rhythms and idioms into everyday speech. Terms for cattle behavior, riding techniques, and trail directions were enriched by this blend, giving rise to a vernacular that, while now considered standard cowboy language, carries invisible traces of African heritage. The act of naming, of coining expressions, was an assertion of presence and authority in a world that often attempted to render these men invisible. Through speech, humor, and storytelling, black cowboys not only communicated the practical necessities of life on the range but also preserved a living link to their ancestral traditions. Encoding resilience, wit, and wisdom into every word. In rodeos and informal gatherings, these cultural expressions took on new life, shaping not only how cowboys interacted with one another, but also how Western society would eventually imagine itself. Techniques and terminology perfected by black cowboys became standard, though often credited elsewhere. Songs sung on the trail inspired melodies that would later permeate country and blues music, and the visual identity of the cowboy, from the curve of a hat to the knot of a lasso, carried subtle hints of African influence. In this way, African American contributions were both foundational and transformative, seeping into every aspect of life on the frontier, influencing not only peers but generations that followed. The blend of African traditions with Western life was not always recognized, nor was it always acknowledged. Hollywood and popular media often whitewashed the cowboy myth, presenting the West as a monochrome tableau of white masculinity and heroism. Yet those who understood the realities of the trail knew otherwise. They saw the precision, rhythm, and artistry of black cowboys in every expertly guided herd, every steadying hand on a wild horse, and every evening spent sharing stories under a star-filled sky. These contributions created a culture that was adaptive, resilient, and richly textured, reflecting the complex interplay between survival, skill, and heritage. Moreover, the cultural imprint of black cowboys extended beyond entertainment or fashion. It became a model for community, solidarity, and mentorship. Experienced cowboys taught younger riders not only how to rope or ride, but how to navigate the challenges of a racially divided society, how to carry oneself with dignity in the face of prejudice, and how to preserve the pride of heritage while mastering the demands of frontier life. Through music, clothing, language, and ritual, African American cowboys transmitted values and traditions, ensuring that each generation inherited both practical skill and cultural resilience. The West, therefore, was shaped as much by these invisible teachers and performers as it was by the more visible, celebrated figures, and their influence continues to ripple through American culture to this day. In tracing the legacy of black cowboys, it becomes clear that their contributions were holistic. They were not only laborers or performers but cultural architects, blending inherited African traditions with the demands and opportunities of Western life to create a unique and enduring identity. From the sway of a song across the prairie to the tilt of a hat against the sun, from the cadence of speech to the patterns stitched into chaps and saddles, their influence is everywhere subtly woven into the iconography, music, and language that define the cowboy mythos. In recognizing their role, we see that the American West was never a blank slate. It was a landscape enriched by diversity, creativity, and resilience. And the black cowboy's imprint is inseparable from the story of the frontier itself, a testament to how culture and survival intertwine to leave a legacy that endures long after the trails have grown quiet. The names Nat Love, Bill Pickett, and Bose Ikard resonate through the stories of the American West not simply as cowboys but as symbols of courage, innovation, and perseverance, embodying the essence of a generation of African Americans who transformed freedom into mastery on the open plains. Each of these men carried with him a story of struggle, skill, and ingenuity, their lives intertwined with the trials and triumphs that defined the frontier, and their deeds leaving imprints on the culture, economy, and imagination of the West that persist long after the trails they rode have faded into history. Nat Love, known to many as Deadwood Dick, grew up in the shadow of slavery in Tennessee, yet he refused to allow his origins to define the limits of his life. As a young man, he ventured westward, embracing the vast landscapes that promised autonomy and opportunity. On the trail, he distinguished himself through his exceptional horsemanship, his precise roping, and his keen ability to read the movements of cattle and the subtle cues of the land. Love's courage was matched by his intellect. He carefully chronicled his adventures, producing one of the few autobiographies that captured the first-hand experiences of a black cowboy. Through his writing, he preserved not only personal feats but the broader reality of African American contributions to the West, offering a narrative that challenged the sanitized myths presented in dime novels and later films. Every contest he entered, every long cattle drive he completed, and every tale he recorded served as both proof of his skill and testimony to the resilience of those who, like him, carved a place for themselves in a world that was often hostile to their presence. Bill Pickett, in contrast, became legendary not solely for his trail work, but for revolutionizing rodeo performance with a daring style that would forever change the sport. Born in Texas to a family with deep ties to ranching, Pickett drew upon the techniques he observed in everyday cattle management. Inventing bulldogging, a method of wrestling steers to the ground by biting their upper lips to control their movement. The audacity of this technique captured the imagination of audiences far and wide, earning him fame in rodeos across the country. Yet it was also a practical extension of the skills developed under the harsh realities of ranch work. Pickett's performances were more than spectacle. They demonstrated ingenuity, fearlessness, and a deep understanding of animal behavior, transforming what had been survival skills into an art form celebrated both for entertainment and technical mastery. His life was a testament to creativity born of necessity, a reflection of the ingenuity that characterized the black cowboy experience as a whole. Bose Ikard, though perhaps less known outside historical circles, exemplifies the quiet heroism and steadfast loyalty that defined many African American cowboys. As a trusted trail hand for Charles Goodnight, Ikard navigated perilous cattle drives, braving storms, rough terrain, and the constant threat of rustlers with a calm intelligence that earned him respect across racial lines. Ikard's value lay not only in his physical skill but in his judgment, his ability to anticipate challenges, and his unspoken leadership among the men he rode with. Goodnight himself credited Ikard with saving lives and guiding cattle through treacherous conditions, a recognition that underscores the indispensable role black cowboys played in shaping the success of ranching operations and frontier expansion. Ikard's life also serves as a reminder of the countless nameless cowboys whose labor, courage, and experience were critical to the functioning of the West, even if history's spotlight shone only sporadically on them. Together, these figures illustrate the diversity of experience within the African American cowboy community and the multiple ways in which they contributed to frontier life. Their stories are intertwined with the broader narrative of black cowboys who, while facing systemic discrimination, carved out spaces of expertise, innovation, and respect. They tamed wild animals, drove herds across dangerous terrain, and maintained the logistical foundations of ranching that allowed the West to flourish economically and socially. Beyond the technical skills, they infused cowboy culture with music, storytelling, and traditions that reflected their heritage, leaving a cultural imprint that would ripple through generations. Their bravery was not only physical but moral, asserting dignity and presence in a society structured to marginalize them. The frontier demanded resilience, and these men embodied it in every ride and every challenge. On the open plains, their courage was measured by the hazards they confronted. Stampeding cattle, unpredictable weather, and the constant threat of conflict, both human and natural. On the stage of the rodeo, it was measured by the risks they took for recognition and entertainment, often pushing their bodies to the limits for skill and artistry that few could match. The legacy of Nat Love, Bill Pickett, and Bose Ikard was also the legacy of countless others whose names did not survive in printed records or celebrated media, but whose contributions were equally vital to the expansion and identity of the West. Every lasso thrown, every herd driven, and every horse tamed carried with it the echoes of these men's ingenuity and courage. Their impact transcended the boundaries of the frontier itself, shaping perceptions, inspiring subsequent generation, and gradually challenging the erasure imposed by popular culture. While Hollywood often ignored or misrepresented black cowboys, the true stories of these heroes offer a corrective lens, revealing the complexity, talent, and resilience that underpinned the mythic West. They remind us that the legend of the cowboy is incomplete without acknowledging the diversity, expertise, and courage that African American men brought to the trails, camps, and towns that defined the frontier. In the end, the lives of Nat Love, Bill Pickett, and Bose Ikard stand as enduring testimony to the power of perseverance, the value of skill, and the importance of recognition. They represent the courage of men who navigated a world that often refused them respect, transforming adversity into mastery, labor into legacy, and survival into legend. Their stories, interwoven with the broader history of black cowboys, illuminate a truth long obscured, that the American West, in all its daring and drama, would have been unthinkable without the talent, bravery, and vision of these remarkable men, whose influence continues to resonate in the culture, music, and spirit of the frontier to this very day. As the American West grew from reality into legend, the stories of its inhabitants began to be rewritten, reshaped not by the men and women who lived them but by the storytellers of Hollywood and popular media. By the early 20th century, the cinema had become a powerful force in defining cultural memory, constructing images that audiences across the nation would accept as truth. In these westerns, the rugged cowboy became an icon, a symbol of freedom, heroism, and the adventurous spirit of the frontier. Yet the narratives presented on the silver screen were selective, carefully curated, and strikingly incomplete, erasing the true diversity of the West and replacing the many black cowboys who had shaped it with white actors and sanitized portrayals that reinforced racial myths and stereotypes. The consequences of this erasure were profound. While the physical presence of black cowboys had been central to ranching, cattle drives, and trail work, their cultural visibility was systematically stripped away. Their courage, skill, and ingenuity, honed over years of challenging labor and danger, were ignored in favor of a homogenized image that suited the prevailing racial attitudes of the time. Audiences were shown men in wide-brimmed hats and leather chaps, guns dangling confidently at their sides, riding into sunsets with an air of solitary heroism. These figures were nearly always white, their identities and experiences standing in for the many African Americans whose hands had driven the herds, tamed the horses, and navigated the vast, untamed plains. Hollywood did not merely overlook black cowboys, it rewrote history, replacing authentic achievement with a myth that conveniently fit the narrative of white supremacy, making the frontier appear less diverse and more controllable than it had ever been in reality. For the black cowboys themselves, this erasure was a bitter injustice. Men like Nat Love, Pickett, and Bose Ikard had become legends on the trail, their exploits known and respected across states. Yet in film and literature, their stories were suppressed or appropriated. The bravery required to face stampeding cattle, the artistry involved in breaking wild horses, the endurance demanded by weeks-long cattle drives, all of it was rendered invisible or reassigned to white figures who had little connection to the original acts. This narrative manipulation reinforced broader societal prejudices, sending the message that African Americans had contributed little to the building of the West. A dangerous simplification that diminished both their historical and cultural significance. Hollywood westerns often relied on exaggerated stereotypes to fill the void left by this erasure. Characters of color, when included at all, were frequently relegated to subservient roles, comic relief, or exoticized figures that bore no resemblance to the real cowboys who had navigated the frontier with intelligence, skill, and courage. This distortion created a feedback loop. Audiences came to believe that the West had been primarily a white man's domain, that heroism, ingenuity, and independence were racially coded traits, and that the rich tapestry of African American contributions could be safely ignored. In doing, the films reinforced not only falsehoods about the past but also present social hierarchies, subtly validating exclusion and discrimination in the imagination of the nation. Yet even as Hollywood imposed its narrow vision, the truth persisted in quieter, subtler forms. In the songs that echoed across trails and campsites, in the oral histories passed down within families, and in the communities that thrived on rodeo grounds and ranches, the legacy of black cowboys endured. The rhythms of African American work songs, the techniques of horsemanship, and the ingenuity of handling livestock, all of these lived on beyond the reach of film cameras and commercial storytelling. They were not merely acts of labor but acts of cultural preservation, a defiance of invisibility that ensured that the contributions of black cowboys could not be entirely erased from memory. Moreover, the absence of black cowboys from mainstream media inspired a counter-narrative within the communities themselves. Rodeos, exhibitions, and informal competitions became spaces where African Americans could assert their presence and showcase their talents, creating local legends that defied the limited portrayals offered by Hollywood. Figures like Bill Pickett turned skill into spectacle, captivating audiences wherever they performed, and their performances carried layers of meaning, entertainment interwoven with testimony of expertise and identity. These acts of visibility, though often marginalized, resisted the whitewashed myths, reminding contemporaries and future generations that the true story of the West was far richer and more complex than the cinema allowed. The erasure in Hollywood also influenced historical memory, shaping textbooks, popular history, and the national imagination for decades. Generations grew up with the assumption that cowboys were almost exclusively white, that the frontier was dominated by solitary men in brown hats, and that African Americans had little role in the shaping of Western culture. This collective amnesia obscured the real contributions of thousands of men who had tamed wild horses, driven cattle across dangerous terrain, and in doing so, had left an indelible mark on the economy, culture, and identity of the American West. Only in more recent decades have scholars, historians, and community advocates begun to reclaim these stories, uncovering photographs, diaries, and records that attest to the widespread presence and influence of black cowboys. In reclaiming this history, it becomes clear that the mythologized West of Hollywood bears only a fraction of the truth. The real West was diverse, dynamic, and defined by the labor, skill, and creativity of cowboys of all backgrounds. Black cowboys, though marginalized in popular representation, were central architects of the frontier, shaping the rhythms, language, and practices that continue to define cowboy culture today. The erasure in film does not diminish their impact. If anything, it underscores the courage required not only to survive in the physical wilderness of the plains, but also to assert dignity and expertise in the face of cultural neglect. Their legacy is resilient, echoing through music, rodeo traditions, oral histories, and the very techniques of ranching that remain in use. Ultimately, the story of black cowboys and Hollywood's misrepresentation of them is a lesson in both history and memory, a reminder that the narratives we are told often omit vital truths. It challenges us to look beyond the silver screen, to question whose stories are elevated and whose are silenced, and to honor the men and women whose courage, skill, and creativity shaped the real American West. In doing, we recognize that the legends of the frontier are incomplete without the black cowboys who rode tirelessly across its trails, leaving a legacy that no amount of cinematic distortion can erase. A legacy written not on celluloid but on the land itself and in the enduring rhythms of culture that they forged. Today, the story of black cowboys is finally receiving the recognition it long deserved. As historians, documentarians, and cultural institutions work tirelessly to restore their rightful place in the narrative of the American West. For decades, the contributions of African American cowboys were overshadowed, omitted from textbooks, and erased from popular culture. Yet the resilience, courage, and skill of these men endured quietly through family histories, oral traditions, and the few surviving records that managed to withstand the passage of time. In recent years, however, a renewed effort to uncover and celebrate their legacy has illuminated the rich and essential role they played, not only in the economy and culture of the frontier, but in shaping the very identity of America itself. Documentaries have become a powerful tool in this reclamation of history, bringing to life the tales of men like Nat Love, Pickett, and Bose, through interviews with historians, descendants, and archival footage. Viewers are transported back to the vast plains and rugged trails where black cowboys worked tirelessly, proving themselves indispensable in every aspect of ranching, trail riding, and rodeo performance. These films do more than simply record facts. They immerse audiences in the lived experience of the men who tamed the West, highlighting their courage in the face of danger, their innovation in managing cattle and horses, and their quiet defiance against a society that often denied them recognition. By visualizing their stories, documentaries create an emotional connection that allows contemporary audiences to appreciate the complexity, bravery, and ingenuity that defined the black cowboy experience. Museums have also played a critical role in preserving and celebrating this history. Exhibits dedicated to the African American contribution to the West feature photographs, personal artifacts, clothing, and tools, offering tangible evidence of lives lived at the intersection of skill, hardship, and cultural creativity. Visitors can see the saddles used on cattle drives, the spurs that jingled in rhythm with galloping horses, and the bandanas and hats that carried both practical and cultural significance. These objects tell stories that words alone cannot, allowing viewers to step into the world of the black cowboy and understand the challenges and triumphs they faced. Educational programs accompanying these exhibits further highlight their legacy, teaching younger generations not only about the mechanics of ranch work but about resilience, community, and cultural pride. Black rodeo associations have become another vibrant avenue for preserving and celebrating this heritage. Across the country, these organizations provide a platform for African American riders to compete, showcase skills, and honor the traditions of their predecessors. From steer wrestling and roping competitions to horse training demonstrations, these events keep alive the techniques and artistry developed on the trail and the ranch. They also serve as cultural hubs, where stories are shared, mentorship flourishes, and a sense of identity rooted in history is reinforced. Through rodeos and gatherings, the influence of black cowboys is not just remembered but actively lived, providing a dynamic, ongoing connection to the past that bridges generations. The impact of these efforts goes beyond recognition. It reshapes our understanding of American history and identity. By acknowledging the contributions of black cowboys, we confront the myths propagated by Hollywood and popular culture, revealing a West that was far more diverse, skilled, and vibrant than the whitewashed narratives suggested. This reclamation challenges long-standing assumptions, reminding us that African Americans were not passive observers of history but active builders of communities, economies, and culture on the frontier. Their labor, innovation, and artistry helped shape the West in profound ways, from the efficiency of cattle drives to the rhythms of music and the vernacular of cowboy slang, leaving a legacy that resonates to this day. In celebrating black cowboys, we also honor resilience in the face of adversity. These men overcame discrimination, segregation, and social marginalization to assert their worth through skill, courage, and ingenuity. Their stories are not merely tales of labor but of determination, pride, and the relentless pursuit of dignity. Documentaries, museum exhibits, and rodeo events shine a light on this resilience, transforming historical oversight into acknowledgement and inspiring audiences with lessons of perseverance and excellence. Theirs is a legacy that teaches the value of hard work, the importance of community, and the power of cultural expression, demonstrating how marginalized voices can shape history even when society attempts to silence them. The resurgence of interest in black cowboys also fosters a broader appreciation of diversity within American history. By centering these figures, we recognize that the West was never a homogeneous landscape. It was a place where African Americans, Native Americans, Mexican vaqueros, and European settlers intersected, collaborated, and sometimes clashed, creating a dynamic cultural milieu. Understanding the contributions of black cowboys allows us to see the frontier not only as a physical space but as a cultural crossroads where skills, traditions, and identities were exchanged and transformed. It reminds us that the story of America is built on the labor, creativity, and courage of people from all backgrounds, and that history is enriched when we include those who were previously silenced. Ultimately, restoring the legacy of black cowboys is about more than correcting historical records. It is about honoring human achievement, cultural innovation, and the spirit of perseverance that defines the best of the frontier ethos. Their stories inspire us to look beyond stereotypes, to value skill and character over surface appearances, and to celebrate contributions that have long been overlooked. As we recognize their place in history, we also create space for new narratives, new voices, and a deep, more inclusive understanding of who shaped the American West and what it truly represents. Thank you for joining this journey into the life and legacy of black cowboys. If you enjoyed exploring their remarkable stories and want to continue uncovering the hidden histories of America, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating insights, untold tales, and cultural discoveries that celebrate the people who helped shape the world we live in today.